Thank you, Bwana Paul Kasimu, for your welcoming remarks. He mentioned a podcast. How many of us have listened to Money 254? Hosted by the Business Daily. The host is right here with us. His name is Kefa Mwirori. Kefa, just wave your hand, please. Very insightful conversations there on financial literacy, public finance, capital markets, and where they're going. So please make a point of tuning in and catching the latest updates. We have set the scene, and I want to invite a key knowledge partner that we have with us to help us now set the context of the conversations we shall have, and that is Mr. Kwame Owino, Chief Executive Officer from the Institute of Economic Affairs. Karibu sana, Kwame. Let's appreciate him.
All right, good morning, everyone. Kwame Owino from the Institute of Economic Affairs, and I'm thankful for this opportunity to discuss the context under which the 2025-26 budget will be laid. So I have about 12 minutes, so I'll say 4 things. So the first is, I think, just going straight to it. We all know that this year's budget is being prepared against the context of an IMF program that was abandoned, which to us at the Institute of Economic Affairs was surprising, given that, so much effort had been put to actually push towards the end, that the abandonment was, we don't know how to read the signals. Was it good? Was it bad? But I think the consoling thing, or the encouraging thing, is that information, or rather the communication from the National Treasury and specifically the CS and the Principal Secretary is that there's a conversation to ensure that there's no gap, there's no big gap. So another conversation is going on around that, which is one. The second thing which is clear right now is, again, this is about language. We think, or rather, if you read the World Economic Outlook, released about, I think, about 4 or 5 weeks ago now, during the spring meetings of the IMF and the World Bank in Washington, they still say that Kenya is under conditions of risk of debt distress. The language we use in Kenya is that we have a liquidity, not a distress situation, which is, in our view, a distinction without a difference. But nevertheless, I think the pressures on public finances are there. And we see evidence of them in many things, but one of those, of course, is delayed payments here and there. The budget caps that were established obviously suggest that revenues, balancing revenues and expenditures one way or the other. I think we've had 2 budget adjustments, basically supplementary budgets, all to bring everything back into line. But we all know that in addition to that, obviously, the main payments that were supposed to be made during the year, specifically the Eurobond, those were resolved. And we understand that there's effort also being made for some kind of private financing through some bonds. So obviously that situation of whether you call it liquidity or the debt distress situation still obtains. The third issue is we've been on a fiscal consolidation program for a while, and Kenya's fiscal consolidation, which is 2 things: either you discipline expenditure, discipline expenditure, raise revenues, or a mixture, right? In Kenya's case, if you've seen, again, in the budget year that's going to conclude in a couple of weeks, I think it's very, very evident that fiscal consolidation is leaning on revenue. Yeah. And revenue itself has had is behind, or rather barely meeting the targets that were set. Some revenue targets are okay, some revenue heads are okay. I'm not too sure about VAT, the income tax, and that, but on the whole, we are having to run faster to stay in the same space. So the fiscal consolidation is raining. And I think it's clear because the Cabinet Secretary mentioned in a statement before Parliament, again, I think sometime in March, and the idea was that, look, in the turn of the year, on account of negotiations and all that, I think the monthly payment for emoluments for staff of the public sector moved from about 75 billion to close to 80. It's actually a little more than that, but regardless, I think he was still in the ballpark. So obviously there are certain things and movements that are not necessarily, that are adding pressure to that expenditure, telling you how disciplining or controlling expenditure has been much more difficult. And that means that the revenue is leaning, or rather the fiscal consolidation plan is leaning very heavily towards getting more revenue, which itself is a problem. And if you understand the very difficult 1 month or couple of months that Kenyans had in June last year, that's what concerns us, because that was an attempt to raise revenues by about 1.2% of GDP, and it nearly broke the country. So in our view, the idea that you can still run public sector by ramping up revenues, by raising tax rates specifically, is one that is about to reach its limits, especially the low levels of trust that the public sector enjoys in Kenya, both for good and bad reasons. So that fiscal consolidation plan is one, and I think this year's budgeting is going to have to be very carefully weighed against what the public sentiment is around that area. So we also know that there are difficult choices of spending flattening, which has been difficult, and I think a few things that were supposed to happen have been postponed. We know that a series of collective bargaining agreements were coming up for reopening, and the pressure in the public sector, therefore, to continue to open them is out. But there are good things as well. I think one of them is a commitment, and which was made, and I think it was part of one of the specific conditionalities under the IMF program that were approved. The government has an expanded privatization program, in our view at the Institute of Economic Affairs, long overdue, and we hope it's not about buying time and space. I think that privatization program ought to be executed for whatever reason, for two things. One is obviously to ease pressure on public spending, but two, just to raise efficiencies. So I hope we don't turn back, and Parliament especially doesn't turn back by telling the Treasury or the authorities that, look, unless you raise X trillion shillings from privatization, then you shouldn't do it. I think the efficiency gains that will come from that alone will be quite essential. So as I conclude, in my view, these four things sum up one thing, that there are certain expenditures and pressures on the public sector budget in Kenya that are already baked in. And they present us with an opportunity to make very tough choices. And those tough choices are not just about the economics of it, it's about the politics of it. And yet we are in the unfortunate position in which, well, perhaps Parliament and the executive could agree, but in the unfortunate position in which the tough choices that are required, say for instance, freezing certain expenditures, generate political pressures, which I'm not too sure that the administration that sits right now, especially in the executive, is able to dissipate by persuading Kenyans that it's all being done in good faith. So we sit in a period in which I think one program has ended, a new program has started. The terms of the new program will be very interesting. But under no circumstances, and I know these are options, under no circumstances should government go it alone. Because we've had ideas say, look, we can do away with the IMF and actually drive a program alone. In my view, that would be the worst possible alternative. But let's see what happens. Thank you very much.